So, Yannick, I suggest we make a start.
I suggest so too.
Yeah, and then we can get going with this. So, welcome everybody. My name is Ross Nichols. I'm co-hosting with Yannick. I'm the organizer of Salisbury International Coaching Week, and Yannick has kindly offered to do 2 online events for us. And this is the first time we've done the online events, and this is the very first one. So, thank you very much to Yannick for that. Is everybody content that we record and share on social media this session?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm getting a positive from everybody there, just to check.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. As we go through, if you have any queries or concerns, you can use the chat function, which on my screen is centre bottom if you hover over the toolbar at the bottom. I'll be monitoring the chat box while Yannick is doing his stuff. And then towards the end of the session, I'll facilitate the question and answer session. Any questions? Okie dokie, over to you, Yannick.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for the introduction, Ross. I'm really happy. First of all, a massive thank you to you for all of the work that you put into organizing these events. I know what it's like to organize events, to organize a week full of events. The 4th year in a row, it's phenomenal. I know how busy you are, and I know how much busier this makes you. So thanks for giving lots of coaches the opportunity to learn, to grow, to come together, to meet each other. This is brilliant. I do believe in coaches. I do believe in coaching. I really think we need more coaches, even though the number is exploding. I think we need more coaches who are skilled and who are ethical and who really support people in doing good things out there in the world. And I know that it doesn't take that much training or that much development in order to give people a space to develop, to grow, to learn something. Because really, as soon as we tune in and we are interested in what's going on for people, we can deliver value. However, I also know from having studied optimal human functioning and well-being and the science of positive psychology that the more theory and evidence-based interventions and techniques and skills we add, we can magnify and maximize that kind of potential that we can get out of people. You know, so. Yeah, that's kind of where I'm from, and that's what I believe in. That's why I'm super happy to take part and put this out there. I'll tell you a little bit more about myself in a little bit. Coaching for happiness is the subject. What I'm gonna to take you through is a little bit about who I am, why coaching for happiness in the first place. Why is that important? A little bit about like what is coaching, because the people I know here in the webinar, they know it's quite an umbrella term for a huge range of one-to-one services. So I just wanted to put a bit of a frame around it. And if we look at what coaching for happiness, we need to figure out, well, what is happiness, right? So that is the main, like about half of the talk today will be about what the science have to say about what happiness is, what are the pillars of happiness, and what do we actually mean when we talk about happiness or well-being. There's different terms for it. So I want to talk you through some of the major theories from positive psychology. So then I want to talk you through a little bit how this could look like in practice. Because when we talk about coaching for happiness, it's quite a vague term of what it can be. When we talk about positive psychology coaching, it's a little bit more narrow, but still very, very ill-defined academically, and it can mean lots of different things to lots of different people. So I just wanted to put forward what exists so far and get a bit of discussion going about what it could be like. And in the process of that, I'll introduce a couple of different techniques, a couple of different theories or techniques or skills that we could use from positive psychology in order to have this kind of evidence-based approach to coaching for happiness. And I'll end with a couple of resources that I found really helpful for coaches and people who are generally interested in happiness, well-being. A bit of further reading and a bit of further learning and training opportunities. Cool. So I wanted to put that statement out there in the first place to start with. Whatever we're after in life, in the end, it comes down to some form of happiness. And just for yourself, I want to just take a moment to think about that, because in my experience, whenever somebody set foot in the coaching room, no matter what that goal was, whether that was, getting a promotion or getting out of a toxic relationship, or maybe fall in love, or, leave their career, do something they're passionate about, perhaps deal with some anxiety or something that they're struggling with, something they wanted to overcome. In the end, it was always some form of feeling good or better. And for me, so far, that has never failed to be the case. The presenting issue, the thing that clients bring into the coaching room, ultimately, if you letter it down, if you ask, okay, so now that you have that thing that you wanted, what would that give you? And you ask that question between 2 and 15 or 50 times, you get to some form of happiness or well-being, some pillar of it, some element, some aspect of what happiness can be. Just because it's such an ill-defined term. If you ask 20 people what happiness is, they give you 20 different answers. So we're going to revisit that, but I wanted to put that out there for you to consider for a moment. So me, as Ross said, my name is Yannick Jacob. There's a lot to what I could introduce myself as, but maybe just a few words about my story. I wanted to study something that's not going to get boring. I wanted to do something in my profession that is always going to keep me on my toes. It's always going to be interesting to me. One of my top strengths is interest and curiosity in the world, adaptability. I kind of see systems fairly quickly, and then I just need to go through to mastery and put a lot of work in it. I'm like, well, then my interest kind of shifts. So I figured, what's not going to get boring, which is people. So I studied psychology, and then I sort of fell into a master's in positive psychology because it was offered at my university and turned out to be the second master's that has been established in the world. And so I kind of fell into positive psychology because here was a science that looked at what's right with people. What are the elements of well-being and happiness? What are the resources that we could build on rather than the problems that we need to make go away? Just because we're fixing a problem, just because we're going back to zero from, let's say, -8 or -5, doesn't necessarily mean that we're happy just because we don't have problems. So positive psychology added to that, and that was fascinating to me. And also there was a lot more to explore because it's such a young science. So through positive psychology, I discovered a lot of the research from coaching psychology came from positive psychology. And so I discovered coaching as a profession, was always interested in psychotherapy and counseling. And all of a sudden I found myself and I realized, wow, coaching is really my thing. I can be who I am. I can be very authentic. It's not so overregulated. And I can work with normal people, so to speak, the ones who are not suffering, who are unable to cope, but people who are generally quite resourceful and whole, and help them to be better or to know something, to figure things out, to move forward generally. So that's how I got into the whole coaching thing. And I wanted to work with people across the spectrum of what they can experience. So a lot of positive psychologists I found sometimes to be overly positive. So I wanted an approach to coaching that would appreciate all of the difficult challenges that life throws at you on a very regular basis. So I studied existential coaching to give me the foundation of, the existential void and human anxiety and challenges and all these inevitable conflicts that we carry around as human beings. But with my positive psychology lens, it allowed me to help people work towards happiness, but at the same time, not neglect or not ignore all of the difficult parts of what it means to be human. So I taught at the University of East London. I ran the Masters in Coaching Psychology there for 3 years, and I was teaching on the world's only Masters in Applied Positive Psychology and Coaching Psychology. So I really have a lot of experience with working with coaches who are trying to bring these two fields together. Coaching, positive psychology, but also existentialism. So that's me in a nutshell. There's a lot more. I'll share some links in the end if you want to know a bit more. But I think that's it's important to give you a bit of a framework about where I'm coming from and how I'm approaching this subject. I mentioned coaching for happiness, and why? Because ultimately, in the end, there is some form of happiness going on. And if we have a language, some terminology to explore what happiness actually means, if a client comes to you and says, "I want to be happier," I don't really know what they mean by that. So it gives us a language. If we try to understand happiness more and the concept of it and what different people mean when they say happiness, it allows us to talk to somebody, especially in that goal setting stage that coaches usually start with. Somebody once mentioned to me that, if you get into a taxi, no taxi driver asks you where you come from. They ask you where you're going. So if we assume that where we're going or where coaching clients want to go is some form of feeling good or better about themselves, some form of happiness, then it's useful to figure out what it actually means for them. So why happiness? Well, it feels good. That's perhaps the obvious one. But beyond that, we're thinking there's a wave of research that came out of early positive psychology, which was only founded in 1999, that found that happy people are more productive, they're more likable, they're more active, they're more healthy, more friendly, more helpful, resilient, and creative. It's a piece of research by Sonia Lubomirsky and her colleagues. They also experience more meaning. And there's also good research evidence in favor of applying strengths, gratitude, character strength, that is, doing something that you're naturally good at, being grateful for what you have in life, adopting an optimistic worldview, practicing forgiveness, kindness, humor. So if we apply those to coaching practice, Robert Biswas-Diener has found good evidence that this is really useful for the coaching process. So there is some good research that happiness is not just a good thing because it feels good, but also because it is useful in so many aspects of our life. So the theory behind, as I mentioned, is the science of positive psychology. I just wanted to give you a very quick overview. Initially, it started because some people had noticed that as personal income and GDP have grown and increased, generally, the percentage of people that were very happy, the state of happiness, of individual happiness, of subjective well-being, of how happy people judged themselves, tended to stay the same. So even though we now tend to have more money overall, we're not necessarily happier. So there's something going on there. Positive psychology has been defined as the study of the conditions and processes that contribute to the flourishing or optimal functioning of people, groups, and institutions. Applied positive psychology, so applying the scientific findings of positive psychology, is the application of positive psychology research to the facilitation of optimal functioning. So we could have arguments around what optimal human functioning and what that is, and we could get into the philosophy of it. But I just wanted to kind of put a frame around it, that positive psychology as a science is really there to illuminate our understanding about what makes a good life and what's right with people. And that's just quite important to put a frame around it. It doesn't reinvented the wheel. So a lot of the ideas from positive psychology that have been around, they've been around for a very long time. Aristotle has thought a lot about happiness, and Maslow has been the first to use the term positive psychology in the 1950s. But really only since 1999, when Martin Seligman, then the president of the American Psychological Association, brought into being positive psychology as a worthwhile endeavor of science to create a new branch that was meant to complement psychology as usual and kind of complete psychology by looking at not at the deficit, but at strength, at resources, at positive emotions, at all of these positive things and positive aspects of human living. so that we could learn more and build on the positive rather than just make the negative go away. So it adds a scientific understanding to the coaching processes, and also it adds tools and techniques and assessments that we can use as coaching practitioners. Also, obviously, as individuals, a lot of positive psychology has been applied outside of the coaching space. So it's a much larger field, but I want to focus on what we can actually use as coaches for our clients.
Just pausing there, Yannick, to welcome Imola. I know you've got your mute on, Imola, but good evening and welcome.
Hey, Imola. Good to have you here. So generally, there are two camps. They're the ones who create knowledge, the academics. They do the pieces of research. They don't come up, but they derive the theories from the data that they analyze. And there's those who apply the knowledge. And sometimes they're the same people, but often, especially as coaches who don't necessarily have an interest in doing academic research or scientific studies, they read the books and they read the papers, hopefully, and they use that kind of knowledge and the theory and apply it into practice. You know, sometimes we talk about the real world, and sometimes it can feel a little bit isolated, or, you know, the academics sit in their ivory towers and do their research. But really, positive psychology, applied positive psychology in particular, is always meant to be applied, as the word suggests, to practice, to people's lives, to groups, to individuals. So within a coaching framework, we talk about the application to individuals, unless you do some group coaching. But I want to focus on one-to-one work, just for the sake of simplicity. So it is a science. I mentioned it's new perspectives on existing ideas. We use the scientific method to gain new insights, to test ideas, to build hypotheses. We go looking at what's right with people at their best, people who are using their strengths, you know, people who function best or get the best results, people who are very successful or happy or satisfied with their lives. And we look at what do they do, what kind of elements or aspects do they have, what behaviors do they show, in order to be that happy or that good or that optimally functioning. And then perhaps we can generate that knowledge and apply it to other people so they can do more of that. You know, not every technique or intervention fits everybody. There's no one size fits all. But we can, through research, generalize certain ideas and certain interventions and say, we're fairly confident that this works for most people or for people in specific contexts. So that's how the scientific process works when it's done well. So we look at resilience, we look at interventions. It's never meant to exist on its own, but it's meant to complement mainstream psychology. And it's been growing frantically over the last 20 years. So it suggests that it resonates really, really well with people. Here's a couple of areas of research: strength, positive emotions, well-being and happiness, obviously. There's a lot of work done on assessments and psychometrics so that we can measure and measure progress. We looked at mindsets, positive mindsets, growth and fixed mindsets, self-regulation, engagement and motivation. You might have heard of flow theory. We looked at evidence-based interventions, but also a whole range of other topics: creativity, wisdom, positive aging, self-esteem, self-respect, characteristics of positive groups and organizations. So there's positive leadership in there, hope and optimism, positive emotions, relationships, post-traumatic growth, and so on and so on. So there's a huge...
Yannick, just pausing there to welcome Jules Whale to the call. Hi, Jules.
Hi, Jules. So you see there's a huge field of study. And for coaches, depending on what kind of coach you are and what kind of people you work with, there's a lot that you might be able to draw on in terms of, you know, if you wanted to have some more grounded knowledge, rather than perhaps the one that's anecdotal or that you have from your experience. Science really gives you a window into, you know, not testing what your experience is of something, what you know as a person, common sense, or what you know from working with your clients, and see if it's the same in Japan or in the Ivory Coast or in South America. You know, so that's the useful thing about science. You're able to to look at the whole, to generalize knowledge, to see, have better knowledge about certain areas that you learn about. And then from that, you can derive interventions, or you can just conversations about that. Some coaches recommend books or explain theories. Some have a psychoeducational element in there. So all of this is quite useful to understand people, but perhaps also to suggest knowledge, or to educate, or to find homework or activities or exercises that people could do to increase their sense of well-being, or any of these areas of study. Any questions so far?
No, but I do love the concept, positive psychology, the study of conditions and processes that contribute to flourishing people, groups, and institutions. That sounds fantastic. I'll have some of that, please.
Fantastic. There's more to come. So just quickly, what is coaching? Is a question that we could probably spend many, many hours on. Coaching is a huge umbrella term for one-to-one work and also for group work, and I have seen it being thrown around very lightly. If you ask coaching psychologists, they tend to have a much more defined view on coaching. I've at a bunch of conferences lately that I've been speaking on, I tended to ask the audience, do you have a definition of coaching? Do you have a sentence or perhaps two that you could use to describe your coaching? And I've been astonished how few people actually have that on their fingertips. Probably most of us can talk about it for a couple of minutes in terms of putting a frame around coaching, but a lot of the times as well, it's a bit ill-defined. It can be a bit vague, even though it seems so powerful. So academics are really interested in putting a tight frame around it, but in a profession that is so under-regulated and has no official definition, it's not a regulated term, so anybody can call themselves a coach. And that has a lot of benefits, but also brings a lot of problems with it, especially if we're trying to study it. So for today, I just wanted to put this forward, this model of Eric de Haan in relational coaching, a fantastic book, by the way. He describes the playing field of a coach on these two axes, suggesting and exploring, and confronting versus supporting. So these are spectrums, obviously. Some coaches are very supportive. Some coaches are very confronting, challenging. Some coaches make a lot of recommendations, advice, suggestions, and others help their clients explore predominantly. I think a good coach will move freely within this playing field. And every coach I know, I've trained hundreds of them, and they've all found themselves being quite at home in a certain area along this playing field. So if you look at that and just take a moment to kind of identify where you feel most at home, and perhaps where you sometimes go and under which kind of contexts. For example, I had a client, I'm generally in the area of challenging and exploring, but I also noticed some clients, depending on our contract, they could really do with some advice, and they're really not advice, but like putting some recommendations on the table. Another client, a coach that I've been working with, talked about throwing the diamonds up in the air and letting the clients pick. If you have very little time and there's a tough challenge for a client, maybe you want to be more supportive in that kind of period of the coaching. And maybe it isn't appropriate at the moment to challenge their worldviews and their beliefs and their ideas. But I think it's a really useful model to kind of figure out, okay, how can I respond to a client, and where do I feel most at home and what comes more natural to me, but also in relation to what does the client need from me in order to get best value. I'll just let that sink in and give you a moment just to kind of identify yourself or find yourself on this playing field. So then how to use coaching to increase happiness? If we ask that question, we need to ask first, what is happiness? So here's one idea which came in the 80s, satisfaction with life. And you could ask a very simple question on a scale of 1 to 10, or if you imagine this as a ladder, whereas, you know, at the bottom, you're not satisfied with your life at all. And above and at the top of the ladder at 10, you're completely satisfied with your life. You know, that gives you some idea of what satisfaction or perhaps happiness could be. So there's a scale that you can ask 5 very simple questions, and Dina and his colleagues have actually gone around the world and asked many people in I think 100 countries or so these questions, and that gives you something real, you know, that measures people's people's sense of satisfaction with their life. So if you think happiness, does that make sense for you? Because some people would say, yeah, happiness is when you're completely satisfied, right? But then other people say, no, actually, happiness is more than just being satisfied with the conditions of my life. You know, what about, you know, you could, but some people would disagree. So take a minute just to think about whether you agree with that, or is there more to it? There can be more to it. So here's something that has been termed the happiness formula, which is always quite attractive to have a formula to calculate happiness. They call it subjective well-being, because well-being is something that is very subjective and very much individual. So subjective well-being here is measured as satisfaction with life, as we've just seen, plus positive affect, so good feelings, good emotions, but let's say comfortable emotions, and minus negative affect. So if we have a lot of joy and not a lot of pain or not a lot of sadness, plus that sense of satisfaction with life, if we put that all together, then we get to something called subjective well-being. So there's an idea of what happiness can be, and that comes a lot closer than satisfaction, right? Yeah. Well, but what about eudaimonia? What about flourishing? What about that sense of meaning and purpose? Because, for example, if we, let's say if somebody worked for a charity who works with HIV positive children, you know, and they or like cancer support, people who work with trauma recovery, or grief counselors, bereavement therapists, you know, they would be exposed to a lot of sadness throughout the day, or a lot of frustration, perhaps. Like there's all of these challenging, usually termed negative emotions. But at the end of the day, they would go to sleep and they would feel really good about themselves because they're doing the right thing. They're aligned with their values. They're aligned with their beliefs, and that feels really good. So we're going towards self-actualization, personal development, transcendence, long-term goals. But on the other side, there's feeling good and hedonism. So if we balance that out, then we can get to something closer. So there's a lot of people have said, well, there's something missing. So here's another theory of motivation initially, essentially, but a theory of well-being nonetheless, which puts the 3 core components out there of autonomy, because to us, it's really, really important to us human beings to do what we like to do, to have that freedom to do what we want. You know, the biggest pain, like the biggest punishment that we have is put people into prison. Well, except for like actually killing them, but like the most accepted form of punishment is to take their autonomy away and to tell them what they do and what they need to do, and when they eat, when they sleep, when they're allowed to go out. That sense of competence, that I have the skills to deal with whatever environment I'm in, and there might be very different skill sets, but to have that sense of competence, of being able to deal with our lives and what's been facing us, that's really important for self-determination and for well-being. And a sense of relatedness, of having positive relationships in your life. So these 3 factors have been found to be really important for somebody's psychological well-being. I want to jump to a different one first. There we go. Because here you can see autonomy, environmental mastery, or competence, sort of different word for it, and positive relationships, relatedness. They're also in this model. But Riff and Keyes have added self-acceptance, a sense of personal growth, which might not necessarily mean earning more money. It could be earning less money, but it's a sense of change, of positive change, of growing as a person. You know, that's been really found to be really important for psychological well-being. And a sense of purpose in life, a sense of a meaningful existence. And again, this is completely different depending on who you are. But this has been found to be really important when it comes to a sense of psychological well-being, which we could loosely call happiness. But the sense happiness have actually by researchers not really been used because it's such a fluffy term, so to speak. So here's one of the most popular models of well-being called flourishing, PERMA, by Martin Seligman, who's one of the big names in positive psychology, given that he's one of the founding fathers of it. He has 5 elements in this: positive emotions, feeling good; engagement, finding flow, being really engaged in your daily activities, has been found to be like really crucial elements of well-being and happiness. Relationships, again, authentic connections with other people, relatedness; meaning, purpose, we've already seen that; and a sense of achievement. It feels really good to achieve a goal, to set yourself a point in the future where you want to reach, but then to get there, you know, crossing something off your to-do list, you know, releases serotonin, makes you feel really good, but it has more than just positive emotions, than just hedonism. You know, there's more to it than when we set out to do something and then we make it. Recently, a silent H has been added for health, you know, because if we're not in good health, that really affects our level of happiness. And here's another theory that I don't want to spend much time on, but it's all based, it's an evolutionary psychology informed theory, which at the ground level sets survival skills, you know, physical needs, for example, health, and also security and safety skills, for example, feeling safe in your environment, as the absolute bedrock, the foundation of happiness. It's the thrive and survive theory. So if we don't have those foundational skills, you might have heard of Maslow's theory of needs. You know, that's a helpful concept to think about happiness, because before we don't have those foundational skills, then we can't really be happy. You know, we can have wonderful relationships, but if we're fearing for our life, or we are in very, very ill health, it's very difficult to be happy. So I'll leave that at that. Please do look it up. It's in a book I'll recommend to you later, and it's worth exploring a bit more. So let's revisit that, and perhaps I'd be interested in your thoughts on this as well. Now that you've had a bit of an insight into how happiness has been conceptualized by science, does that match how you have been thinking about happiness, or what your clients are going for, why they come to coaching? So I want to spend a few minutes just to hear what your thoughts are, whether there's something you feel that's missing, or whether that explains happiness quite well. You know, is that a useful framework? Do you have a favorite theory across the ones that I presented? Let's talk.
So, in terms of managing the group, if you want to respond to that, please unmute yourself and give us a wave, and I'll nudge you on. Anybody care to respond to that question? Yes. So, Veronique, please go ahead.
No, yeah, I think it was quite interesting. I've always struggled myself with the definition of happiness. This is something I've been talking as well with my coach. And so, yeah, these models are quite interesting. The last one, thrive and survive theory, I find is very typical of kind of the world we live in at the moment, where, you know, on the top of the pyramids you have success and the fact that you need to thrive. And this is something I kind of struggle a little bit with, because I think we live in a world where, yes, these days it's quite a lot about success and performance, and this is something that for me, that's not what I thought for a long time, that my happiness was linked to how well would be linked with my achievement and how well I would succeed. But I found out recently that that's not at all the case. But obviously, I think we're in a society these days where we tend to think, and that, you know, performance and, like I say, success and achievement is defines happiness. You know, that's the summum, you know, if you succeed in life. Yeah, I've come to realize that that's not at all what happiness means to me. But for a long time I thought it was, you know, I thought I needed to achieve, and I was always striving to, you know, to be better, to, you know, and so yeah, that's quite interesting. But yeah, we can talk I could talk about for a very long time around happiness and what it means and what it doesn't mean, and yeah.
Right. Yes, thank you so much for that. I also found it interesting that achievement and accomplishment has been added so late, comparably to these well-being theories. But I think it's very true that society puts certain elements of well-being beyond others, and that's certainly interesting. So thank you for that.
There's an interesting comment from Joe here. Most of these descriptors of happiness to me sound like what I would call meaning, i.e. engagement, authentic connections, purposeful existence, autonomy, mastery, growth, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
But it struck me, Yannick, how this is a greasy pig, isn't it? I mean, you've come with half a dozen models of happiness there.
Yeah.
Some of them are quite detailed, and you know, it's quite hard to grab hold of, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, by the way, I'm happy to share the slides later, so you can revisit some of the names, some of the theories, some of the references. But yes, what I found interesting, that a lot of them actually share the same components. For example, autonomy, meaning, relatedness, a sense of being able to deal with your environment, you know, being engaged in life. So some have different focus, like a different focus on certain elements, but they also have different names. So what I've learned to do as an academic, I'm very much interested in the terminology here and in the fine-tuning and in the details of, like, this theory to another and how do they really differ. But as a coach, really, the only thing that matters is that the definition of happiness by the person in front of you.
Yeah.
You know, so you can throw all of the theories out of the window. If somebody tells you that's happiness for them, that's meaningful and that's important. So, but what the theories help you, or certainly help me, is to be interested in what I'm not hearing. Yeah. So, for example, if somebody tells me that they want to be happy and they come with a happiness goal, you know, which is kind of what we're talking here. Somebody says, I want to be happier, I don't feel so happy. And then it allows me to be curious. Yeah, tell me a little bit about, you know, what your life's like, or what do you feel happiness is about. And if they tell me about a bunch of different things, but I have never heard him talk about any other people, I would get curious on the basis of knowing the theory. I would get curious about his relationships. You know, how is your connection with other people? How do you feel about others? You know, tell me about your friends. Tell me about your family. Tell me about your colleagues at work. You know, because I know that positive relationships play such a major role in people's happiness, according to research, that at least I need to be curious. You know, some people derive more happiness from relationships than others. You know, some derive most of their happiness perhaps from being very engaged in work, and they don't care so much about positive relationships. But I know that if they don't have any positive relationships, it will be detrimental to their well-being. So in this way, without getting into too much detail, studying the theories will really help us to be curious about what we're hearing, but also what we're not hearing, in addition to giving us a language and perhaps some good evidence or some good arguments that perhaps here's something that they might want to look at. Right. Unless there's burning questions, I would move on from here. I'll take that as a yes. Cool. So where do we go from here? What does it look like in practice? Well, as I already kind of alluded to, a conversation about what happiness is or actually means if somebody comes specifically with that goal is really, really, really helpful. In that, if you work with a grow model, and it's difficult not to in some form or another, because it's basically, where do you want to go? Where are you now? What's the space in between, and how can you bridge it? So if somebody comes with a happiness goal, we have a language and a terminology to explore what happiness might look like for them. Which elements, which building blocks, which pillars of happiness and psychological well-being are important to them? Which ones do they want? But generally, there's no tested models, there's no unified theory, there's no rules in coaching really, and there's very few guidelines on how to do positive psychology coaching, for example. I mean, coaching for happiness is a very loose term, and I very consciously chose the term quite loosely, because happiness is very loose and coaching is very loose. So in the end, you need to decide what kind of coach you are, what kind of process you follow, and then your client needs to decide what they mean by happiness. So they set the goal of what happiness means, and then you help them. But like, there is no tested scientific model for coaching for happiness. Coaching, positive psychology coaching, is not a term that exists that means one thing. You know, there's one master's in the world that aims to combine the two, and academically, it's not quite there yet. So it's really quite an interesting field to get involved in. But like, for coaches who are not interested in the academic field, really what matters is, well, which are the bits from positive psychology that could help me or help my clients increase their levels of happiness? So here's a few. I just want to throw in a few of the models of how positive psychology coaching has been made sense of in its very early stage of development. Biswas Dine has wrote about it. He was the first who published a book on it. This is from Positive Psychology Coaching in Practice. He says, well, there's positive emotions. You use strength-based coaching, and you use positive interventions and assessment. So there's 5 tenets in his model. You know, humans have an innate drive to grow, to change, to overcome. You know, that's in all of us. We want to grow. We want to change. You know, we want to overcome challenges. We are striving towards flourishing. You know, we need that. It's innate in us. We don't need to do anything. We just need to help somebody get in touch with that innate driver. You know, we're all motivated towards that. Positive psychology coaching focuses on strengths, and strengths are powerful, even more powerful than focusing on weakness and to achieve success. So the positive psychology coach would say, rather than fixing your weaknesses, I'm going to be focusing on your strengths and help you use your strengths, what you're naturally good at, as much as possible during the day. So there's very powerful evidence of, for example, if somebody's very, very unhappy at work, to remodel or redesign the way that they engage with work based on what they're naturally good at. So this might be somebody who's very, very courageous, you know, help them to take more risks at work, or somebody who's very good with people, very emotionally intelligent, but they're spending all day working on their own in an office, you know, in a little cubicle. Maybe we try to get them work with more people and more in a team environment, because then they can use their strengths more because they're interacting. You know, maybe we want to move somebody to the client-facing side if they're really good at interrelationships. So working with somebody's strength is equally powerful or even more powerful as focusing on weakness and treating disorder or fixing what's wrong with us. It's about positivity. You know, positive emotions have been shown to make people more creative. So if we initiate a coaching session with positivity, with asking somebody, well, what was good about today? What's the best thing that has happened to you in the last week or the last 24 hours? You know, you crack a joke, you have a laugh. You know, you create a positive environment grounded in positivity, rather than inquiring into people's weaknesses and what they're here to fix. You know, that will elicit more creativity. Barbara Fredrickson's theory of positive emotions, the broaden and build theory, has demonstrated that positive emotions help us not only to undo negative emotions, but also to broaden action thought repertoires. So very clever research has found that we are more creative, we have more ideas. And if you put that into a coaching context, imagine you get to that stage in coaching where you brainstorm options that you have in order to bridge that space between A and B, between where you are now and where you're trying to go. You know, some clients you will have had experiences with that, you know, that struggle to find solutions or perhaps think outside the box to find different solutions. You know, they're stuck because they've tried all the things that they know and none of them have worked. You know, and coaching very, very often is a way to broaden our repertoire of possibilities. You know, we want to create more possibilities so that we can break out of our stuckness. So research has found that if we're in a more positive mindset, if we have more positive emotions, then we're better at thinking outside the box. So we can actually quite skillfully and like quite consciously create an environment of positivity in order to allow that to happen for our clients. You know, by simple questions like, tell me about a time when you were at your best. Tell me about a time you were really happy. You know, hell, we could show them a cat video if they are so inclined. You know, I see Ross laughing, but it works. Right now, Ross is probably more creative. You know, not saying that you were in a negative emotional state before, but like, these are little things that we could do. So attention must be paid to both positive and negative aspects. So nobody is saying that you need to ignore your client's weaknesses and problems when they want to present them. You know, it's just saying that we focus more, and perhaps the starting point is something positive. You know, that our line of questioning goes more into the positive. It doesn't say we cannot ever talk about anything negative in the coaching space. You know, because that would be stupid. Because and it breaks the relationship. If somebody comes and they want to talk about what's bad, what's been hurting, you know, how they were annoyed at work or frustrated, you know, how they feel they're not good enough. We can't just cut them off and ask them a question about, you know, what's been good in their lives. That's going to break the relationship. But this is where the art of coaching comes into play. You know, we can allow that to happen, but invite them to focus on the positives and on the resources and what's right with it. You know, even if they vent about a certain situation, just a simple question is like, what's good about this situation? You know, something that they might have not considered. You know, and maybe the first response would be, there's nothing good about this situation, fuck off. Maybe there's almost always something that you can learn, you know, even if it's just, well, if I didn't feel like this, you know, when we feel really bad, then we tend to appreciate more when we feel really good. Because if we always felt good, then good would become the new normal. You know, human beings adapt. So then we have to feel very good in order to feel good. And a little bit good would be the new bad. So actually, if it's just that, there's always something positive about a situation. But like, don't force a client to focus on it, you know? So we need to still be skillful in how we manage our relationships. So the fifth tenet is perhaps the most important in positive psychology coaching, because this is about using scientifically derived knowledge and assessment, you know, in order to work with our clients, because the theory and the knowledge that comes from science is a unique way of understanding our clients and coaching as such. So not everybody believes in the scientific method. Sometimes it's badly executed, and we shouldn't derive all of our knowledge only from the scientific method. There's different ways of creating knowledge, for example, through philosophy or through common sense or through spiritual insights. You know, some things we just know. We don't need science to help us know it, you know, but certainly science is a really useful thing to engage with, to at least consider. You know, if scientists come up with a certain theory that goes against what we believe in, it makes me pause. I don't just buy everything that comes from science blindly, because the scientific process has shown that many of the scientific theories that have existed in the past have been changed based on new research that emerged. So it's important to not blindly trust the science. But the positive psychology coach would use what's scientifically derived, trust the scientific method, and work in that way. So here's another playbook, so to speak, a positive psychology coaching playbook, which comes from the wonderful positive psychology program. They have a fantastic blog with lots and lots and lots of resources, very practical, some really good products as well that are paid for, but the blog is free and it's wonderful. So Seth has been doing a fantastic job for almost 6 years now. Here's a playbook that they put forward. So just I put that on there just to show you that it could be very structured. You know, you could have a 6-session playbook and you say, I'm going to sell you 6 sessions, and on the basis of those 6 sessions, you're going to feel happier afterwards. And these are all based on research. You know, you start with some client info and contact details. Cocktail details. That would be great too. You explore their values and you set goals in the beginning. Then you explore a client's strengths. What are you naturally good at? Build a profile. You could use some of these free strengths assessments, like the values in action, the VIA, for example. AuthenticHappiness.com is where you can do a lot of these kind of tests. By the way, these are in the end and the resources as well, so don't worry about writing that down. But it's a really good entry point into coaching relationships. And many of you do that naturally, perhaps not with the kind of structured tools, but certainly in a conversation, you figure out who is that person in front of me? What do they want? How do they tick? You know, how do they think? What's important to them? What are their values? What are their beliefs? What are they good at? You know, character strengths tell you a lot about what somebody finds important in life. You know, then you work on behavioral change. You work on obstacles to their goal and how they could cope with that. You use the power of positive emotions to brainstorm ideas and put them into action. And then you do some evaluation and work and figure out how they could move into the future after the coaching has ended. So personally, I don't use a set structure like this, but I can certainly see that being really attractive to a lot of clients. You know, those clients who you know, the kind of client that likes to have a very clear structure. And it certainly sells. You know, if a client comes to a consultation and you say, look, this is what we're going to do. You know, in session 1, we're going to do this, then we're going to explore that, then we're going to work on this. And by the end, you're going to most likely be much, much happier because we're going to work through so much stuff. You know, that gives people certainty, and that gets people confident about, okay, I like this person. They have a plan of how we're going to move forward. You know, my process is a lot more fluid and we might go all over the place. I still have that structure in my head, but it might be going from A to Z to N to 5 to, you know, and then in the end we still work always on their goal. But it goes to show that different coaching processes by different coaches are different. You know, if you're a very structured coach and you work with very structured, loving clients, then you're probably going to use something that has more structure in it. You know, if you're more into open conversations and you trust your process and that, you know, value and behavior change and growth will emerge from that, you don't need a set structure. So I put that out there so you know it doesn't matter what kind of coach you are, you can always use bits from positive psychology and they fit into almost any model of coaching. Here's a couple of books on the subject. There really aren't many that have been written yet. I mentioned Practicing Positive Psychology Coaching by Robert Visvesdina, that model is from. I have written a book, a short course book that I wrote for Animus. You can download that from my website, by the way, for free. You have Positive Psychology Coaching in Practice by the wonderful Susie Green and Stephen Palmer. That is the latest one that has come out and features chapters of lots of really heavyweight coaches and lots of interesting, inspiring stuff of how it could actually be applied. But that's brand new. That's only a couple of months old. There's two others, Coaching Positively by Matt Driver, and Positive Psychology in Coaching by Sandra L. Foster and Jeffrey Auerbach. They give you some insight, some ideas, some inspiration of how this could work. And they all derived from science. But beyond that, there isn't much out there. And the science is still catching up, particularly about testing the models. Because a lot of this is practicing coaches who use positive psychology, and they use that with their client and then they write about it. But what we need, the academic in me really yearns for more scientific studies that actually look at some of those models and some of those processes that have been generated and how they could be applied, and in which order they would be most useful, or which techniques for which kind of clientele, for which kind of demographic. So there's a lot of work to be done in the field of positive psychology coaching. But again, like, it doesn't depend on what's the most effective process when it comes to positive psychology coaching. It's about helping a client figure out what kind of happiness they mean, and then helping them to put some of the science into practice to help them get there quicker or get there in the first place. So that's it. Who you are is how you coach. We need to integrate the science into the way that we practice with clients. Because first and foremost, coaching is a relationship between two people, or perhaps between multiple people in groups. But if we think one-to-one, coaching is a relationship between two people. And then you can integrate the tools, the methods, the theories, the knowledge, the experience, the homework, the exercises, the interventions. So you need to, what I want you to do is not to become positive psychology coaches or happiness coaches following a certain format or a certain formula or a certain model or process. I want you to think about your process and perhaps be inspired by what we know from science and what we know from the theory, and figure out which elements of positive psychology, which elements of the knowledge could I integrate in the way that I already work. So there's two slides with possible application techniques, and I could spend a very long time talking about them, which I want, but I wanted to give you a limited list. There's certainly more, and depending on which coach you ask, but these are the bits that I know they work quite well because I've been using them. I know coaches who use them. Some have research behind them in terms of the actual application to clients. There's a lot more. I have this course in positive psychology for coaches where I have sessions for each of these and really go into quite some detail about how they work and how they might be structured, how you would apply them. But I wanted to at least give you an overview of what's out there. So for just a few words on each of these, what are we doing for time? Aha. So a few words on each of these. When a client talks about what they're trying to achieve, I can listen between the lines. I notice these elements and well-being pillars, these aspects from the theories. I can hear them between the lines, and I can make a mental note about what's important to them, what they're chasing, what I'm not hearing things about. So training your ear to be able to listen to well-being aspects, really useful for coaching, regardless of what you then do with them. Lettering goals, asking, okay, if you had reached that goal that you're telling me, if you had gotten promoted, what would that give you? You know, and then you ask that question again and again and again until you arrive at one of those ultimate goals. You know, because somebody might tell you, well, if I got the promotion, then I would have a sense of personal growth. I would do a job that is really engaging and that makes me really feel good about myself. And yes, I would earn more money, but really I would use that money to give my family a really good time and have a sense of safety in life. And then they have everything covered. But plenty of people say, well, I want to earn more money. Well, if you had that, why? Well, I want to buy that car. And well, because I want people to look up to me. But how that actually makes them feel and what that gives them, that's what you're trying to arrive at. Because then maybe it's not the promotion, maybe it's not losing the weight that's gonna make them like themselves or feel appreciated or have better connections or relationships with others. Maybe there's other opportunities and other avenues towards that goal, that ultimate end goal. So lettering is a really useful exercise. We can monitor progress. You know, we can use some of these questionnaires. Plenty of them are in that book on my website that I mentioned. We can use that, plenty of questionnaires to monitor how somebody is progressing. You know, we can use an assessment in the beginning to help people figure out what their strengths are, perhaps some of those strengths that they weren't quite aware of. You know, so there's so much assessment in positive psychology that can help us start a very useful, valuable, deep conversation about who somebody is and what somebody wants out of life. I mentioned working with strengths. We can get good at strength spotting, reflecting them back, hearing them. But we can also, in a very structured way, ask people about a time where they were at their best. We can ask questions that help us identify or help the client identify what their strengths are. And then they can use more of that. We can figure out we can be informed by the theory of flow and engagement, what the conditions for flow are or for flow states are. And then we can use that in our coaching to help a client create the conditions that make it more likely that they're more engaged at life or at work or at tasks that they might have dreaded in the past. You know, something they're not looking forward to. Maybe they can use more of their strengths. Maybe they can create more challenge when they feel bored. Maybe they can train in order to not feel so anxious and overwhelmed with a certain challenge. You know, if we create a balance between challenge and skills, it's much more likely that we engage. So there's a lot of what flow theory can contribute to the coaching process, especially if it's about happiness, which is very much linked with engagement and flow. We can help people develop more positive thinking, a way like a lot of CBT is about helping us to correct thinking errors or take a really good look at the way that we talk to ourselves and that with the thoughts in our head, you know, how we make sense of past events, both good and bad. You know, something good happens, it was just luck, you know, or something bad happens, you know, it means I'm stupid, I'm always going to be a failure, you know. So dealing with some of those thinking styles and learn to make sense of the past more optimistically or look forward with a more positive mindset. You know, there's a lot about mindset and a lot of research has been done around mindset. It's so important and it's so powerful. So there's a lot of interventions. There's a lot of exercises, activities that we could offer to clients that they can use in their own time. Positive psychology has brought out so many of these interventions that have been tested over and over again in many different demographics, many different countries, in many different varieties, so that we can know here's an intervention that will help you create more meaning and purpose. Here's an intervention that will help you feel better. Here's an intervention that helps you feel healthier. Here's an intervention that generally boosts happiness and well-being or flow and engagement. So there's a ton of them out there and still very much developing. We have understood so much about post-traumatic growth that we can apply positive psychology and the science of happiness even in areas that are not necessarily happy. You know, if something horrendous has happened or something that has traumatized us, if something has happened that has pierced our belief system, or really challenged us, our value system and our beliefs and how we make sense of the world. There has been a lot of research into, look, we can actually grow. A lot of people actually grow from traumatic experience rather than be stuck in post-traumatic stress syndrome. You know, resilience is a big topic in positive psychology. You know, some people bounce back quicker after a negative event than others. How can we learn techniques and skills so that we can also bounce back quicker from adverse events in the future? So there's a lot that we can do in the kind of negative spectrum of well-being that can help us and that come directly from positive psychology science. I mentioned mindsets, particularly around growth and fixed mindsets. Growth mindset being focused on process and learning and development, where people with a fixed mindset, they're very focused on results, on outcomes. And you know, I'm sure you know people who are very fixed on the result, you know, the perfectionist among our clients. You know, it's difficult for us. They're very engaged and committed and they work very, very hard. But if we talk about happiness, we need to let that shit go. You know, if we focus too much on the outcome, it's not good for our sense of well-being. If we focus on learning, we're much more likely to appreciate having fallen on our face or having made a mistake, because it's an opportunity for growth and learning rather than something that defines us as a failure. So lots of work around mindsets. Carol Dweck's book is fantastic, and she has a whole body of research to fall back on. I mentioned measurement tools. Something I'm very passionate about is awakening a positive existential mindset. The second wave of positive psychology, PP 2.0. How to embrace challenge and suffering and all of the shit that life throws at us on a regular basis. It's partly related to having a growth mindset, but it's also so much more than that. So that's quite a transformation to develop that kind of mindset. And that's something that I'm particularly passionate about. And also lots and lots of research into mindfulness and meditation. It's been a buzzword recently. You might have seen that article that mindfulness is being introduced in hundreds of schools in the UK. The research is phenomenal that came out over the last 15 years. And we really need to cultivate more mindfulness, which in essence is a form of meditation, among many, many forms of meditation that are out there. So lots of things to say about that. I'll leave it at that. Here's a couple of interventions that I wanted to list, but won't go into. These are the ones from Sonja Lyubomirsky's book, The How of Happiness. And these are the ones that have good scientific evidence behind it. There's tons of interventions. Many have just been put out there because they worked for some people. These are the ones that we can say with a good amount of confidence work for most people most of the time. Here's the 2 books on Positive Psychology 2.0. One I have written and it recently came out, so I really wanted to put that forward because I'm really passionate about that. I think that makes a huge difference in life. Second Wave Positive Psychology by some of my colleagues at the University of East London, or former colleagues rather now. Both fantastic. And if you're interested in the intersection of positive psychology and existentialism, Second Wave Positive Psychology is great. Existential coaching, I have a lot of, my positive psychology lens comes very much through in this book, but I don't mention positive psychology a lot by the term. But if you're interested, you can read more about that. I've mentioned those books, but I put them here because at the end there's some further reading, and these are really the go-to addresses if you want to read more about this topic. Here's some resources. Like I said, I'll get Ross to send this link out to the slides so that you have those and you don't need to write them down very quickly. If you don't get them, email me. My door is always open, so I'm happy to send them to you as well. Especially that video collection, it will keep you up for many, 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 many hours. There's many videos in there. One of my former students has compiled this, and it's fantastic. I mentioned the blog, and I also mentioned my course, which I wanted to offer you 20% off as part of the coaching week and as part of you tuning into this. It's a steal. There's monthly live sessions, lifetime access. I've put a lot of what we've talked about here with a lot more time, and 6 coaches in the room that ask me questions about it, plus a Facebook group where we can discuss what's coming up for you. And so very much involved, very much a community that I want to grow. I've only released this not too long ago. So if you're interested in in learning more specifically about coaching and connecting to other people who also want to learn about positive psychology and how to use it in coaching, then I recommend this. So check it out if you want to learn some more. Happy to talk about it. Just reach out and I'll have your questions answered. I do work with coaches. A lot of the former students from positive psychology obviously are interested in learning and keep growing. I think every coach should be in supervision. That's just the best way to grow as a coach. So I needed to make that statement, and I hope more and more coaches will engage in it. Because the coaches who are on supervision, they are the coaches who develop the furthest. Any form of reflection is good. If you do it under the shower, or you talk to friends, or you talk to other coaches, it all helps. But the best way to grow as a coach is to have a trained professional. It's the same thing with coaching. It helps you to talk to a friend, but if you talk to a trained professional coach, it's going to help you grow more than if you talk to a stranger on the street or you think about your own well-being and development. And that's it for me. Please do stay in touch. I know many of you who are here tonight live, they're already very much in touch with me, and I'm glad that you joined. I invite anybody to stay connected, because it's important that we know each other as coaches. We know what each other's specialisms are. I refer clients fairly regularly. If I know somebody, for example, Ross is working with trauma, I know that. So if I know somebody that I'm not going to coach because I don't necessarily work with that kind of trauma, I would probably recommend Ross. So if we know that about each other, it's useful, because then we can send our clients to the person that they would get the most value from. And I think that's important. So let's talk to each other, talk to me, let's stay connected. And with that, I'm say thank you. And I'm super interested in getting a bit of discussion going in the last 10 minutes. I'm happy to stay a little bit longer. Thanks. And let's talk.
Thank you, Yannick. So simply to make this easier, if we could have feedback from just the way you appear on my screen. So Helen Snape, any immediate comments or questions? Helen, we'll quickly go around the room. Hello, Helen. Helen is on mute and invisible. So let's move on to Jules. Jules, Helen. Are you back with us? No? Okay. We'll move on to Jules. Any comments, questions, reflections, Jules? Unmute, please. Let's unmute Jules. I'm trying to unmute you. Yeah.
He's a coach with structure.
Am I here?
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Jules, we can hear you.
Thank you. I found it very, very interesting, because as I said in my comment, I've always been very nervous about tackling happiness, because it is so subjective.
Mm-hmm.
And as a coach, I've always steered clear of that. So this particular sort of session with Yannick has been absolutely fascinating. So thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Thank
and
you.
I just saw Tillman is there. Well, that makes me very happy.
Joe Aston, any thoughts, reflections, questions, Joe?
It's been inspiring. I've been reminded of so much. I haven't actually studied in the past, and I've just been inspired to reintegrate this into my practice. Excited about delving into the resources. Still very much got this question on my mind of the relationship between meaning, happiness, and the kind of existential tensions that we all face in life. But I'm sure I'll find some answers in some of those book recommendations. But I mean, if you do have time, I'd love to hear a bit more about the relationship between, I suppose, those three. It
was meaning, happiness, and the existential challenges. Or?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, to put something very long, very short, it's a very subjective thing, because what's meaningful to a person could be completely different than what's meaningful to another. But right. Meaning has come up in most of the major well-being theories as an essential part of it.
Ja, ein Freund von mir ist gerade...
Yeah, you need to mute yourself, Tillman.
Ach so, man hört mich, wenn ich rede?
Ja.
Ach so, ich dachte, das kann man nur aus- und anstellen, wenn man reden will.
Oh, no.
Das ist die App zum ersten Mal, aber schön, dich zu sehen.
Yeah, nice to see you too.
Lass uns später mal telefonieren, bitte.
So yes, so it's a very complex kind of relationship, Joe. But it's because it's so subjective, right?
And what I see is that happiness seems to be less subjective. There seem to be universal experiences that cause us to be happy, but there's this small component of happiness which is about what we find meaningful, and that's where it's far more subjective.
Right.
I mean, I don't know how true that rings with you, but that's what I've taken from everything I've seen here.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And this is really where coaching becomes so important and so valuable, because it's not an answer that you can give somebody. It's a process of exploration to then for the client to decide what's meaningful for them, what feels meaningful. You know, it's a mix between emotions and rationality. You know, it's everybody has to make that decision, what gives their life purpose, or what they find or experience as a meaningful way to spend their time on this planet. So there is no answer to this. There's only an answer that you give yourself for perhaps a particular period of your life. And sometimes these things change depending on how you change. So it's constantly in flux and a process of exploration. That's why I think it's useful to have that kind of conversational space where you explore continuously, am I still on the right path here?
Mm. And finally, you did want to make sure I heard something right. You said, I think I heard, happier people find things more meaningful.
Yes, there was that particular piece of research. They report that they have more meaning, which makes sense, right? Because it also works the other way. Like people who engage in activities that they find more meaningful, they're going to find themselves happier.
Yeah.
But then meaning, I think it's important to note that meaning also isn't one thing. There's a lot of research and a lot of debate happening within the meaning research community. There's a really good conference, by the way, that I want to plug here in July in London. For those of you, I know quite a few of you are in the UK. In July, around the weekend of the 12th, there's a meaning conference by the IMEC that looks at all of these different aspects of what meaning can be, you know, because it's not one thing. So happiness is not one thing, meaning is not one thing, coaching is not one thing. So it becomes a very complex relationship between different aspects of all of these. But that's a longer conversation. So I'd love to just hear a couple of other people as well, just as a form of conclusion or a summary, just kind of what you made of it, what more questions are. And then perhaps we can formally close it down around 9 or shortly after. And I'm happy to talk for a little bit longer. I'm also happy to address some questions afterwards.
I'd like to ask Imola to share reflections, questions, comments.
Hi, everyone. So I am already a certified positive psychology coach, and I am supervised and mentored by Yannick.
Imola trained with Robert Biswas-Diener, by the way, the book I mentioned earlier. So I was excited to work with her because you know, he's over in the States, and it's not that common that you meet people who were trained by the pioneers.
And I'm excited about working with you.
Okay, enough.
Yes, and I came to this webinar because I felt that I want to hear to refresh, because we haven't been speaking about positive psychology in particular lately. So I learned some new things that I need to look up. One thing that it is a challenge for me, and it's more related to coaching than it is regarding the positive psychology, and that is Dehane's model, the four, and because I find that I have trouble suggesting things to clients or anything that is anywhere. I really struggle with that in my sessions, and because I don't know. Well, suggesting an intervention, that's okay, but even with that I sometimes feel uncomfortable, but that's okay. But with advice, for example, you mentioned advice, that is something that I really struggle with, because I'm not sure that I should do that, and I think that comes across as well. It is not positive psychology, it's
Okay, so that's an interesting comment. I hear something about your coaching style there, Imola.
Yannick is on mute.
Let's unmute man. How's that happened?
Good. I unmuted myself because I had to cough, and then I gave the hosting over to Ross, so I couldn't unmute myself anymore. Interesting learning.
Same happened to me.
Yes, I mean, everybody has their own style, right? It's interesting. That's why, like, most coaches would probably say, I find it difficult not to give advice or not to suggest things, because like it's sometimes really difficult to sit on that. So it's actually unusual that coaches find it hard to give advice because, but it really depends on the context, right? Especially if the more you know about positive psychology, or you more about any area of expertise, if you've coached people, let's say in strength, in, let's say, senior leadership teams in the insurance industry, then you know a lot about what it's like to be a senior leader in the insurance industry and what the kind of strength profile is that role requires. So you have a lot of knowledge, and the more knowledge you have, the easier it is to give advice or make suggestions. The more you know your demographic, the more you work with the same kind of people, the easier it is to put some useful stuff on the table that has worked for others in a similar situation. I generally am much a fan of helping people to find their own answers and find their own way. But especially when I work with coaches on like business building, for example, there's certain entrepreneurial skills that are quite common, or like that are basic skills of running a business. So some of these techniques or skills, they're useful to put on the table to perhaps make a recommendation, and if you have that relationship at eye level where I don't know how you should be running your business, but here's something that seems to have worked for a lot of people. It's like, I don't tell you what to do in order to be happy, but here's an exercise that we know from science has shown to have phenomenal effects. If somebody comes to me and they say, well, I find I really struggle focusing. I always get distracted and I think about other things while I'm trying to do a task. I know from research and experience that meditation is the kind of skill that will help you focus your mind and be more in charge of where your attention goes. So I'm in a position where I can put some interesting interventions, exercises, or activities on the table that could help you. I'm not instructing you have to do that, but I have some suggestions.
Okay, thank you.
So, Helena, your thoughts, comments, reflections.
Am I off mute or on mute? Sorry.
You're okay, we can hear you.
Oh, right, sorry, I thought I'd be automatically on mute. So I thought that was really good. And actually, in terms of my own journey, I feel like it's very reflective of that, Yannick. So that's quite, it's quite interesting. And I've always seen happiness almost, well, recently more so than before, through developing on my own journey. I've almost seen happiness as an external thing and actually peace and bliss as an internal. So it's kind of like the happiness is, I think it was alluded to before, around success and achievement and accomplishment. And I think it just goes back to this point around, really, it is what it means to you. And that is the thing that I always come back to with my clients, is about what is happiness to you? Because actually, it could be any word and it could mean something totally different to someone else. So it's really important to hone in on what it means to them. And yeah, and it's really interesting. One of the things that I did note down that, we always say as coaches, what is it that you're not hearing that's important? And sometimes I struggle with that, because I think, well, it's body language, it's this, it's that. But actually, I love the fact that there's lots of different models. You can pull from them and think, well, yeah, this is all going on in this scenario with this client, but actually they're not saying this part of it, and maybe there's something there. And I think, going back to the point around advice, I'm very much similar to Imola, is that I don't give advice because I see the power of coaching so powerfully that it means I get upset if I give any advice, so I don't do that. But what I do think is powerful is, like you said about the interventions, is that you can actually ask questions, which when you've got more knowledge around a subject, you can ask questions around that much more easily without being, leading questions. And I think it's really powerful to have those tools, those different models that you can reflect back on. And a question I had was, you said that the books have come out quite recently, and this is all. And apologies if I missed the first part. I was just finishing off the client.
Of course.
So I suppose my question is, how come? Because I'm aware that psychology, going back to Freud, etc., how come this is now new? And I'm sorry if you've covered this already.
Don't worry. Seligman has only, when he became president of the American Psychological Association in 1999, he was the one who put it forward. He said, we really need to throw more research money at this kind of stuff. And so this is really when all the research got sparked. So we only really have scientific data, like, good evidence, good data sets, empirical evidence since around that time. Some of these have started earlier. You will have noticed that psychological well-being, for example, is from the 90s. So some of that has been looked at, but there's a huge wave of research starting around the millennia change.
Yeah, no, that's great. And it's interesting because I've not heard you say this, and I'm not sure where it sits in it, but the science, one thing that I'm quite interested in is the quantum physics side of it. Is that the right way of putting it? Sorry. So Deepak Chopra and his kind of
quantum physics, yeah.
Yeah, quantum physics. And I wonder how that fits into.
Well, he's more than that, but I think that's what you mean.
Yeah, a little bit bigger than that, isn't he? Aspiring. But yeah, how does that maybe fit into positive psychology, or is that like something else, maybe outside of it, do you think?
That's a really good question. Quantum physics goes beyond the level that we can see in this realm of human consciousness. It operates outside of what we can perceive with our senses. So while it definitely matters, and I'm sure Joe will be very interested and might have some things to say around that, it does influence us on many levels, I'm sure. But I think we need to start with what we can perceive in this realm of, what like not what matters to us, but like what we can work with.
Mm-hmm.
Because if we go into the subparticle state, then it becomes it influences behavior, but it's not where we influence behavior. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, it's like taking those steps, and you kind of almost on your journey go into that development. I almost see kind of like development, self-development coaching, and then you kind of go up like different levels and up to quantum physics.
You can think about, how does normal physics influence human psychology?
Yeah.
And you're like, well, gravity influences us, but like, but like if we think about coaching practice, can we work with gravity? I guess some people do. Like, do we need to understand the universe and how it's structured and what the planetary, like what the solar system looks like? But does it influence our coaching work necessarily?
That's a good question. I think I'll think about that one.
I like your thinking. But yeah, I guess we start with what we can see and measure and observe. And when we work with people, we work with that relationship. And the other levels are worth exploring, but I guess it comes a bit later.
Yeah. Thanks, Yannick.
Veronique, any
Yes.
thoughts, comments, questions from you?
Well, first I would like to thank you, Yannick, because that was a very interesting webinar. So thank you very much for this. I was personally, so I'm not practicing that much. I'm not coaching that much at the moment, but I was interested in finding out more about positive psychology, and that's definitely something that I think I'm going to be looking into in the future. So I'm probably going to have a look at your website, Yannick, and also your course, because this is definitely something that I'd like to explore a little bit more. For me personally, in terms of my personal development, but also as a coach, I'm sure that will be very helpful for me. So thank you very much for this.
Thank you, Mona. Thank you, Vero.
Okay. That's wonderful. I think we should start.
Hold on. One more. Jules, I just came across a comment there where you said you're quite nervous about exploring happiness with clients. Are you still around? Could you say a bit more about that?
I am.
Hey, that is super interesting. Could you say a bit more?
I think my view on it was, and you've touched on this, is the subjectivity of it, and happiness to one person isn't happiness to another person. And when I'm coaching, we obviously do refer to happiness, but I've never yet had a client that says I want to be happier. So I haven't ever pushed in that direction of suggestion. Yeah, and that would be the nervousness around it, to try and assume that I could get somebody, prior to listening to your talk, assume that I could actually coach somebody into being happier as that state without anything else attached to it. So yeah,
that makes
I think
sense.
you said the same, Ross, didn't you?
Yes, I did on the comments.
Yeah, that's super interesting because, obviously I come from a positive psychology background, and so I've been putting that kind of stuff out there for a little while. That's why people seek me out for that kind of
That's
work.
why I wanted to listen to you this evening, because in my training, we were taught, alluding to happiness is perhaps not the best way to go, because of the subjectivity stacked around it. So I particularly wanted to listen to you this evening, and that really has clarified my thinking.
Yeah, I think it's also interesting when you said, well, people haven't really brought it up as a happiness goal. I think when people bring up a goal, I think every goal is a happiness goal if we ladder it down to what they're ultimately trying to achieve. You know what I mean?
So do I now. I've listened to you.
Yeah, right. Okay. Oh, fantastic. Okay, thank you so much. And sorry, Ross. I was just really curious about that comment.
So I'd like to draw it down, if I may. If Yannick shares a link with me for the slides for this evening's presentations, I will send it out to you all. Those who have registered on Eventbrite, I can reach. Those who have not and joined the call separately, please get in touch with me somehow, Facebook or email. I need your email address probably so I can share the link with you. Where will we share? Are we sharing a recording of this evening, Yannick?
We will share the recording. I haven't thought about it. Probably on my YouTube channel.
Okay.
And I'm happy to send that to you so you can distribute, or you just look me up, Yannick Jacob, on YouTube. I can't promise you when exactly I will have edited it.
Yep.
Hopefully soon.
Okay. And for me personally, I'd say thank you very much. There's a lot of information there, a lot of resources. And I was drawn immediately to the PP 2.0 Embrace Suffering. And I thought rather cheekily that maybe I'm a negative psychology coach. Maybe that's the place I want to go. But within PP 2.0, it's there. So yeah, there's an answer for everything. Okay. Last orders. Anybody, anything else to add?
If you stick around for another minute, I'll post the link to the slides in the chat room.
Okay, brilliant. Other than that, thank you all for being pioneers this evening. As I say, this is the first ever online event for Salisbury International Coaching Week, so it's a bit of a milestone for us, and it's been a great experience. So thank you very much indeed, Yannick. And
No, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Yannick, and thank you, Ross, for organising it.
You're very welcome. So I'll look forward to your link in the chat box. Yannick.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Have a great
you.
evening.
Yeah.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
No, everybody's saying bye and sticking around.
I know. I'm waiting for the link.